I love this show so much. I watched
Oh,
it. I'm on my third watch of it because my husband is finally catching up with it. So I've seen it twice fully.
mm,
And even though, I didn't grow up during this time period, I feel it feels very personal to me. There's a lot of really emotional uh things that even though I know that are coming, like that final scene in the final episode, like I cry so hard watching that. Um, so
mm.
long way to say thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for making you breaking your heart. That's
Every single time. Yes, yes. Um,
what I was aiming for.
good, good. Well, success many times over for me.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you for saying that. That actually it really means a lot to hear you say that. Thank you.
of course. Um, I think I wanted to start with asking about perspective, just because I mean, one of your biggest successes in your career was Philadelphia, nominated for an Academy Award. I keep thinking about when I realized that you created the show and you wrote the screenplay for that. There's something about, what was that, 92, 93? 93 is when it came
It
out.
was the end of '93, so yeah, yes.
And it's sort of like, I just remember every award show, like a lot of people had red ribbons on. We were sort of in the, I don't want to say in the middle of it, but it was sort of just like the community was in the middle of it. And I kept thinking about coming back eventually to that time period with fellow travelers. And I guess I just wanted to know what that felt like for you in terms of developing, especially the later part of the series. Because I feel like as I get older as a gay man, I'm just like, I can't, like this moment in history, we cannot forget about it, and we cannot forget about the emotional beats of it. And I guess I just wanted to say, long roundabout way to ask, coming back to it so many years later, I guess what was that like for you?
Well, I there isn't the AIDS crisis isn't in the book, and
Hmm.
the '80s. I don't know if you've read the book, but which I love. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, but it's focused. It's set in the 1950s.
Hmm.
So when I felt that I wanted to expand the book, excuse me, expand the story beyond what is in the book, it just seemed it probably took a few seconds for me to sort of land in the '80s and the AIDS crisis, because that was such a formative experience in my life, professionally, of course, with Philadelphia, but also personally. And anyone who, remembers what it was like before there was an AIDS cocktail, before there was PrEP,
Hmm.
when AIDS was a death sentence, and that people you were, there was I just remember so clearly walking down the street near where I went to film school, Columbia, and the secretary of the film school, Jim, stopped me on the street and said, "Have you heard about this weird cancer thing going around in
Hmm.
the gay community?" And 2 years later, he was dead. And
Wow.
that it was just that was happening, over and over and over again. So it was just so that was such a significant event that I thought, there was a time in our country where the government actively persecuted federal employees who were homosexual,
Hmm.
and then there was a time in our country where the government, through its indifference, allowed thousands and thousands of us to die. And so I thought that it was just a natural bookend for the show.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of for some reason, maybe I'm just like a I won't say a sadist, but there's sometimes I go and I'll watch like the trailer for How to Survive a Plague, just the trailer, not the film, and I just get so 2 minutes long. There's so many emotions that bubble up, and it really uh terrifies me.
Mm.
Um,
That's a beautiful documentary. My friend David
yeah,
France made that. It's extraordinary.
yeah, that's incredible. Um, I wanted to ask you what was on because Allison Williams mentioned this to me. Um, she mentioned that there was sort of a reading list. My husband, we were just in DC last month, and he was reading Secret City. And he was telling me all about telling me all about, like, we were just like walking, down the street. He was like, we should find all these places in this book. And I thought that was a
Mhm.
really sort of funny thing that we sort of happened upon. But I guess I wanted to know um what was important in terms of helping people understand, this time period in terms of like research. So I guess I just wanted to know what else was on that list.
Well, one of the books that I know was on it, and I can't quite remember too much about it. It's been a while, but was Gordon Dahl's novel, The City and the Pillar, which was
Okay.
his second novel. It was published in 1948. It was a sensation at the time because it may have been the first novel that just presented homosexual guys as they are,
Yeah.
uh, and there wasn't all this sort of coding and getting around it, sort of hiding anything. And what was important to that was, I think, for my younger writers to realize, that there was no such thing as a gay identity.
Mm,
In the 50s, it was, people. I sometimes watch reaction videos to film
yeah.
trailers. I started getting addicted to it, then I thought I gotta slow down. Yeah, and some people are really, really smart, and I've reached out to them and thanked them. But there is, especially younger people, react like, they get angry at Hawk because he's denying his gay identity. There's no such thing. It didn't exist. You didn't have an identity as a gay person. There was no gay community. There were no gay characters anywhere present in your world, in your
Mhm.
thoughts and books, movies. It was this invisible thing. And so people identified themselves as people who wanted to have sex with people of the same gender. That's how they were identified. Now
Mm,
there were pockets of culture in bars and music, and a lot of our culture sort of sublimated, went into, sort of mainstream culture.
mhm.
A lot of movies, et cetera, et cetera. You could look at All About Eve and sort of see, although Mankiewicz wasn't gay, but you can see there's sort of a gay sensibility to lots of classic Hollywood things.
Mhm.
So that book was very important, I thought, just so that we try to understand with sympathy with empathy, not sympathy, what people, how sort of, it wasn't even forbidden to be homosexual. It didn't exist.
Yeah.
Or it was whispered about. Of course, it existed, but it just wasn't something that was present in people's heads. That was a
Mm,
book. David Johnson's book, The Lavender Scare, is an amazing book.
yeah.
And that obviously was a big part of our research as well.
Okay.
And also, and James Baldwin's, I think a Giovanni's Room, I wanted, and Another Country, two James Baldwin's books, I think were put on that list because James Baldwin being black and gay had a very specific uh, way of thinking about the world that I wanted people to be aware of.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of speaking with Jelani last week, and I forgot to ask
Yeah,
him. So I might have to annoy him on Instagram or something.
sure.
Um,
Yeah.
since you mentioned Hawk, I'm really fascinated with that character. There is a certain I keep saying fascination, but I'm very curious about this kind of person who will sort of do whatever they need to do in terms of survival. And my first thought when I watched the series for the first time, even though the circumstances are obviously completely different, it reminded me of the lead character of uh, that Martin Sherman play Bent, where he tells himself, "I will do whatever it takes to survive." So even though that is obviously during the Holocaust, this is completely different circumstances. Um, it pinged in my brain a little bit, but I guess I just wanted to know what kind of conversations you had with Matt about him. I love thinking about how maybe Hawk is away from work versus maybe with his mother. For some reason, the scene between him and his mom, where they're both smoking outside
Mhm.
the house, is very vivid in my brain. But
Mhm.
yeah, I guess I feel like this kind of character is incredibly hard to, I won't say balance, but I mean, like, it's such a beautiful performance from Matt. And I guess I just wanted to know maybe what kind of initial conversations you had with him.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that the scene you just referenced, the two scenes, the scenes that were shot at Hawk's parents' home were Matt's first day of shooting,
Ah, okay.
by the way. And that extraordinary, especially that extraordinary scene with his father, he's really that was, I think we even shot that before the mother scene. So that was
Mhm,
one of the first things he ever shot, and he's just as perfect in that scene. And I think that Matt and I didn't sit and have long conversations
okay.
about Hawkins Fuller. One of the DPs on the show turned to me at one point and said, "I think you are half Hawk and half Tim."
Mm,
And and he's right. And I think Matt and I, and we have talked about this since, is that we both know what it's like to try to protect ourselves from emotional
mhm,
experiences in a way. Whatever, Matt's upbringing and mine were different generations, but we're similar enough in that sort of we both know what it's like to keep parts of ourselves hidden. And I think that all really great drama, gay or not gay, is about what human beings keep hidden from themselves and from other people. I'm so much more interested in characters like that. So Matt and I so I communicate with the
mm,
actors mostly through the scripts. There
okay.
were we had four great directors working on the show, starting with Dan Minahan, who's also an
Mhm,
EP. So they might have had longer conversations, but I think that Matt just intuitively, who's just such a brilliant performer, he showed up every Monday having worked all weekend on his scenes and knew exactly what to do. He just embodied Hawk so thoroughly that he didn't really need much coaching. I have
yeah.
to say, he
Oh.
owned the character thoroughly. And I think that, at a certain point when you're experienced enough and skilled enough, as both Matt and I are, we have both been doing this for quite a while. You just intuitively take on things without having to sort of endlessly debate and
Right,
discuss them. He
right.
no one needed to tell Matt Bomer what Hawkins Fuller was like. That has to do with his skill and the depth of his empathy.
Yeah. Man, I've always thought, I mean, Matt Bomer is, I think people are sort of just blinded by this. He's just a really generous performer, but he's also just incredibly handsome, and I feel like he does not get the credit that he really deserves. I really, man, that performance is just so nuanced, and it's a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
um exploration of a human being. Um,
Yeah,
I
Joey, we were 2 weeks into shooting, and I called him. And I said, "Hey, man, I was just standing in a grocery store thinking about your performance and how great it is." And so I thought, well, maybe I should actually call you and I just said, you're Paul Newman. You're Paul
mm,
Newman. You're our generation's Paul Newman in HUD. If you, for example, in HUD, because what Matt has that makes him a true star and a great film actor, what he's thinking and feeling with him doing nothing. And
yeah.
as we were cutting the whole show, hours and hours, hours with the editors, we would just cut to Matt. Let's see what Matt's doing on the reverse shots. It's like, oh yeah, okay, just do that. Just cut to
Yeah.
Matt. He brings it somehow. His thoughts come through his face, and they're there. And that it's a talent and a skill that is belongs to a star.
Yeah, I feel like I think about that a lot when he's in something. Even like I mean, he's in a big ensemble piece like The Boys in the Band. He's just in the background, but I feel like my eyes are just like, what is that character thinking? What is that character doing? And there's something about like this part of his face that is just really um expressive.
Well, Joey, actually, you just said the key because in writing and in acting, rather than me as a writer or as an actor telling you what I'm thinking and feeling, that's exactly what you want the audience to do is
Mm,
say, I want to know what that person is thinking and
yeah,
feeling. So you have enough information to stay interested.
yeah. Okay. Um, Something that I did not expect fellow travelers to do is to really, I don't want to say shed a light on Roy Cohn. That man is so, I don't know if it's because I read Angels in America at probably much too young of an age, and then saw the miniseries, and then I saw that documentary from a couple years ago. Um, I can't think of the name off the top of my head.
Where's my Roy Cohn?
Thank you, thank you. Um, and I love how the ending shows his patch on the AIDS quilt and what it says on the AIDS quilt.
Hmm.
And I did not expect the show to kind of give me any sort of ounce of insight into what Roy Cohn wants or desires. That small scene between him and David when he's like standing behind him and he goes to touch him, I think that is so like that's another scene I can't get out of my head.
Hmm.
I guess with somebody who is just so infamous, vilified, still talked about. I mean, there's another movie coming out later this year, probably with him in it. I guess I just wanted to know, I'm say how you navigate that, but I guess how do you navigate that?
Well, speaking of that quilt square, that's his genuine quilt square.
Oh, that's
So
his, oh my God.
even, we constructed the section of the quilt that you saw in the show that had Tim's quilt in it. So about 8 of those quilts we made. The
Hmm.
rest are borrowed from the Names Memorial Foundation.
Wow.
So that's Roy Cohn's real quilt square. I don't think he had anything to do with that, but somebody made
Oh,
that
God.
for Roy Cohn. And I when I read about Roy and David, and by the way, the senior reference about touching, actually, it was much bigger than that. They had a fight in a hotel room where the next day the maid found the table knocked over and glass broken and stuff like that. So they had physical altercations. Um, but I think that Roy's obsession with David Shine is such a fascinating part of American history and specifically LGBTQ history because that obsession became national news.
Hmm.
That led to the Army McCarthy hearings. It
Hmm.
led actually to Joseph McCarthy's downfall. As it says, one of the characters says in the show that they're painting you, Joe McCarthy, with the Roy Cohn brush,
Hmm.
homosexual. And that's what happened. That's why the lawyers brought in those words, for the Army brought in those words, pixie and fairy.
Hmm.
So in a weird way, homophobia helped destroy Joe McCarthy, which is so weird and complex. But for Roy Cohn, who is obviously a twisted human being, his mother broke his nose when he was a toddler. I mean, had a doctor break it so that they could fix it, and they destroyed it. I mean,
Hmm.
from that moment on, what chance do you have? And to,
Hmm.
really deformed, deformed him in a way. What chance do you have, to sort of be a normal, compassionate human being?
Yeah.
So he did fall in love once. I believe he loved in his way, which is about ownership and possession, but he wanted something from David Shine. I don't believe David Shine ever returned it sexually, but I
Hmm.
do believe that David Shine allowed Roy to want him because that
Yeah.
gave Shine access to power. So they sort of both got something they wanted from each other. But I do think people might be say we shouldn't have humanized Roy, but there are people in the world who do a lot of evil, but what we have to face as human beings is that they are human beings, that human
Yeah.
beings have that capacity within ourselves to do horrible things to each other. That to me is much more interesting than making somebody an inhuman monster, because then we can dismiss them. There's no part
Hmm.
of me that would ever hurt another human being. So I think it's not having compassion for Roy Cohn, it's just being honest. He's a human being and he actually fell in love once.
Yeah, because it makes me think of just thinking about that scene all the time and then just thinking about like historically what we all know, it's just sort of like it creates this sort of conflict with the viewer where you're just like, why are you doing this, like all every single time he would do something or you know say something really horrible or something against commies and queers. It was just, I was like, what, the amount of self-hatred I feel like every time I see the show, and I was like, never go anywhere near that emotionally for yourself. It's and there's something about there's a lot of interesting shots that a lot of the directors of photography, like there's one that focuses right on his face. I think he's lighting a cigarette and it's right there, and I just, I don't know, I just felt like I wanted to know more about him, and that sort of
Hmm.
freaked me out in a weird way.
Yeah. Well, we
Yeah,
probably know as much about him as he ever let anyone know about him.
right.
people do get seduced by power. And, and Roy at the age of 25 and he was really smart. He was a prodigy, as McCarthy says. And he suddenly had a lot of power, and it's very seductive. Especially if you are not, you look like Roy and
Hmm.
suddenly people are afraid of you.
Hmm.
That's, uh, that's a powerful thing.
Yeah. And Will Brill he's brilliant.
He was brilliant. Yeah, I mean, the cast is impeccable. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
and it was such a joy working with everybody. It was, one of those, it was like a love fest. And, I think we all agree that it has bound us all together,
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah, I'm a big Mrs. Maisel fan. And so when I didn't even realize it was in the show, and then when I saw
Yeah,
it, I was like, oh my God, he's playing
yeah,
Roy Cohn.
yeah.
You're gonna lead me to a lot of conflict in myself. Um, I guess just one last question before I let you go.
Sure.
I First of all, I love Allison Williams in general, but I this performance from her I think is really stellar, and what I love that the show does with her is that it doesn't I was really drawn into the relationship that she has with Tim, even though they don't have a lot of screen time together. I kept thinking about like every time the phone rings at a certain time of day, does she wonder if
Mhm,
it's, who Hawk is talking to?
mhm,
I love the connection that they have when they're in that party scene. There's something about Allison Williams's eyes dancing with Matt Bomer, and that is really
mhm,
I felt a lot of ache for her.
mhm.
And I love how this show doesn't make her a villain because she is in a separate sort of love story with her husband. Where I feel like a lesser show or lesser scripts would make her the angry wife, or make her, do something else with her. And I guess I just wanted to know the importance of also treating a character like Lucy with care, because I think that's a really beautiful aspect of the show.
Well, I think we try to treat everybody as sort of grown-up human beings who make choices.
Right,
And Lucy certainly had an inkling about Hawk in the
right.
early days. I mean, she kind of says so much in episode 5 when she talks about the two gay men and she's looking at Hawk's face and she's talking about her brother, but it's all about Hawk too. So Lucy, I think, makes a choice. She
Hmm.
gets to have part of Hawk and have children with him. And I do believe that Hawk and Lucy were happy as parents. I think they both loved their children very much.
Hmm.
And they had a marriage that worked for them in many ways. And so I just think that we approach characters with respect for their choices. And we had a lot of rules. I had a lot of rules on fellow travelers, one of which was there are no noble victims in fellow travelers.
Mm.
We're not doing noble victims. That's not what we do. That just doesn't interest me. Good people who are put down by society, but they fight against it and they speak their truth. The other rule was no one in my show will ever speak their truth. We don't use that phrase because human beings don't really we don't know our truth. We struggle to find it. And what's exciting is to watch people like Lucy sort of starts to realize 30 years after in their marriage that, I just gotta be honest, this doesn't work for me anymore.
Right.
And that's where we were headed. And I just felt along the way, just respect the choice that she is making to stay in this marriage, to have a father with her, of her children with her.
Yeah, I love that they're actually, could feel a love from Hawk for her.
Yeah.
I don't find that to be fake or performative at all, but I also feel like how sad it is to maybe be a young idealistic person and think like I can live with imperfection. I can do
Mhm.
that. And then
Mhm.
realizing maybe 20 years later when you think about that thought,
Yeah.
that's another sort of tragedy on its own. Um well, thank you so much for your time,
Yeah,
Ron.
Joey, it's been a pleasure. It went by really fast.
I
Thank you.
know, right? Yeah. Thank you for letting me gush at you. I'm looking forward to finishing the show with my husband. I know he's gonna cry like an idiot like I did, because he's a very politically minded person, but he's also very wears his heart on his sleeve. So
Oh, that's beautiful.
um
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time. I'm really rooting for you guys this award season.
Yeah.
So have a good rest of your day.
Great. Thank you, Joey, so
Thanks.
much.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.